G'day Gear Junkies, Jason here. If you've been following this channel for a while, you'll know that I'm a bit of an amateur historian when it comes to the company Boss. In my amateur research, I have determined that there have been 5 distinctive design periods in Boss's history since they launched the compact pedal line in 1977. I've already covered the first 2 of these, which were the Japanese era Part 1 and the Japanese era Part 2. So now we're up to the 3rd era, which goes from 1991 through to 1999. So it basically spans the decade of the 90s. And I refer to this period as the tweakability or functionality era. But before I begin, if you like this kind of content, please subscribe. And if you want to support this channel, you can go to the Middle Age Gear Junkie store and purchase some merchandise, or you can support me through Patreon. The links are in the description below. Your support helps to make videos just like this one. I found the period between 1991 and 1999 to be the most difficult period in Boss's history to define. We had pedals like the deceptively simple BD2 Blues Driver, and then we had really complicated pedals like the PS3, pitch shifter and delay. There were also pedals that looked as though they could have belonged in the Japanese era Part 2. But I think there's enough evidence to suggest that Boss's primary focus at this time was the tweakability and functionality of their pedals, making them far more flexible than they ever had been in the past. If we look at the preceding era, the Japanese era Part 2, this was really defined by uniformity. Most of the pedals that came out at this time had 4 knobs. The ones that had mode selectors had between 2 and 5 modes. The ones that have mode selectors in this era have up to 11 or 12. And some of the pedals might even have up to 7 controls. In music, 1991 was the most pivotal year of the decade. You can pretty much pinpoint the moment where the hair rock movement of the 80s died and where the alternative rock movement took over from it. It's crazy to think that in just a 6-week period, we saw the release of 10, Blood Sugar Sex Magik, Nevermind, the Black Album, and Use Your Illusions 1 and 2. 6 months earlier, we'd seen the releases of Gish and Bad Motorfinger. The musical landscape had definitely shifted. Boss started the year off with a bang, releasing 2 pedals in March that had a feature that would transform their pedals forevermore. That was the dual concentric pots, and it featured on the MT2 Metal Zone. This is one of the most polarizing pedals ever released. It's very much a love-hate thing. You either love it or you can't stand it. The Metal Zone has 6 controls. We've got level and distortion, and then we have 2 concentric pots in the middle, one for high and low EQ, and the other one is a sweepable mid function, where one of the dials is for selecting your frequency and the other is dialing in how much or taking out how much of that frequency you wish to do. It's a bit like having the SP1 Spectrum built into a distortion pedal. The sweepable mid function of the Metal Zone was groundbreaking at the time and has been copied several times by other brands since then. Unfortunately though, it was very, very difficult to dial in on this pedal. It's incredibly touchy. It doesn't take much to change the sound quite drastically. So a lot of people treat it as a kind of set and forget function. Love it or hate it, the Metal Zone has been very popular for a very long time and has sold millions of units over the years. Boss released another pedal at the same time, which was the PQ4 Parametric EQ. This is not the first parametric EQ that Boss had ever released. Back in 1977, they'd released the SP1 Spectrum. This is a single band parametric EQ. The PQ4 takes that idea to the next level. It has 3 of the concentric pots, giving it 7 controls in total. So apart from the level control, we have a control for the low frequencies, a control for presence, which is very high frequencies, and then we have sweepable mids and sweepable treble. Possibly the most unique thing about this pedal is the fact that it's the only Boss pedal to feature the numeral 4. Now, from what I've heard about this, the number 4 sounds very much like the word for death in Japanese and is considered to be an unlucky number. That's why we don't have a DD4 or a CE4. Although this is a unique pedal in Boss's history, it didn't sell particularly well and therefore wasn't manufactured for very long. This means that it's quite rare and it's one of the more expensive pedals from this period to get your hands on. There is a bass version of this pedal as well called the PQ3B. Boss released 3 more pedals later in the year. One of them was the AW2 Auto Wah. This pedal was the successor to the TW1 Touch Wah and the short-lived FT2 dynamic filter. As you can see here, the AW2 looks like it belongs in the Japanese era part 2. It was the first of their auto wah style pedals to be both a dynamic wah, like an envelope effect, and also an auto wah, so it gives you both options, which is really handy. I've done a more in-depth video about that whole series of pedals if you're interested. Also in November that year, they released the CE5 Chorus Ensemble. This is the most flexible chorus pedal that they've ever created. As well as rate and depth, this also has an effect level on the end. This is the first CE pedal to have that function. And it also has a dual concentric pot here on the end for high and low cut. So it gives you a bit of tone shaping ability as well. The CE5 has been used by lots of pros over the years and is a very popular pedal to this day in Boss's catalogue. However, the current day models of this pedal are a bit different to the originals. So for the first 10 years of its life, up until 2001, it was analog. The current day version is digital. And the analog ones are both rarer and more expensive on the used market. Their last pedal to come out in 1991 was the LS2 line selector. This was an updated version of the PSM5, which had come out in 1982. So the PSM5 here has 2 channels. So it has your direct channel and it has an effects loop. So you can put a bunch of pedals in the effects loop and you can turn that on and off with the foot switch. And you can also use it to daisy chain power out to other pedals. The LS2 also has a 9-volt out at the top of the pedal here, so that you can daisy chain power to other pedals. But instead of having one effects loop, it's got 2. Not only do we have 2, but we have separate volume controls for both, so that you can set the volume for each one to be different. Also, we have a ton of different switching options for this pedal that the PSM5 does not have. Some of the switching options this gives you is that you can toggle between the red and green loops, so you can have 2 completely different sounds set up and switch between them. Or if you want to, you can bypass it, so you can set it to green mode and then bypass, or you can set it to red mode and then bypass. So if you're running a more complicated rig, this just gives you a lot more different switching options. 1992 was the first year since the release of the compact series that Boss did not release a guitar pedal. They did release a bass pedal, which was the CE3B. Now, I'm not going to be talking about the bass pedals in this particular video, but I will do a separate video at some stage featuring all of their bass pedals. In 1993, Boss were back to form, releasing 2 of their most highly sought after pedals that year. One of them was the FZ2 Hyperfuzz. Now, Boss had not released a fuzz as part of the compact series since its existence. Roland, their parent company, had created several fuzzes back in the 70s, but this was the first compact size fuzz pedal that they ever made. This has a very unique layout when it comes to fuzz pedals. It's got level and gain, but we've also got bass and treble controls which are bipolar, meaning that you can boost or cut them if you want. And we have 3 different modes. So we've got mode 1, mode 2, and gain boost. Just like the DC2 before it, this pedal was not particularly popular and wasn't made for very long. But then in the late 90s and early 2000s, when internet forums started to become a thing, everybody was talking about how good the FZ2 was and how underrated it was. At the time, you could pick them up really cheap. And as a result, because they are fairly rare, they became very, very expensive. And I think this is probably the most expensive pedal from this era if you were to go out and buy one. Another fantastic pedal to come out that year was the SD2 dual overdrive. Now correct me if I'm wrong, but this could very well be the first dual overdrive pedal ever on the market, because I certainly can't think of one that came before it. This gives you 2 completely different drive circuits and independent control over both of them. We have 2 level controls, 2 tone controls, and 2 gain controls. One channel is a crunch channel, the other channel is a lead channel. And you can set this pedal up with a few different switching options, so that you can set it up so that you can just toggle between the 2 different modes and use it like an always on pedal, or you can plug in a remote jack which will toggle between the modes, and you can use the main switch here for bypass. Now you'd be forgiven for thinking it's just the OD2 with a separate set of controls for the other mode. But I did a video recently about the SD series, and for the Patreon content of that video, I actually compared these 2 pedals back to back through a loop switcher, and I found that both the lower gain mode and the higher gain modes sound very different from each other. This is very much its own beast. It's not just the OD2 with a few more controls. This next pedal, I'm a little bit confused about its existence. It's the HM3 Hyper Metal. And the reason for that is only 2 years earlier, they'd released the MT2 Metal Zone, which was enormously popular. So they kind of had the same market. So I don't really know why they released another metal pedal only 2 years after the Metal Zone. Personally, I actually prefer the HM3 over the Metal Zone because I think it's easier to dial in, and it does a really good job of those early 90s metal tones a la the Black Album and Pantera. I'm actually currently working on a video about all of Boss's metal pedals, and I'm collaborating with an artist for that video, so keep your eye out for that one when it comes out. Due to their continued innovation, we saw a lot of 2nd and 3rd generation Boss pedals come out during the 1990s. In 1994, we saw the successor to the old RV2, which was the RV3. Now, the RV2 came out back in 1987, was only manufactured until 1989, and was taken out of the catalogue in 1990. So there was a bit of a gap between then and 1994 when they released its successor, which was the RV2 Digital Reverb and Delay. As you would expect, the RV3 was a bit of a step up from the RV2 in quality. It's higher resolution, but by today's standards, it's still a fairly low resolution reverb. It allows you to blend both reverb and delay together, which previously you would have had to have a separate reverb and delay pedal to do that. So it gives you the option to blend those 2 effects together, which I think a lot of people would have appreciated. It was also, as far as I know, one of the first delay pedals to actually have trails, meaning that when you turn it off, it would just play out the last few delays before completely switching off, which was a new function at the time. I have covered these two pedals in a bit more detail in another video, so if you're interested, please check that video out. Also in '94, we saw the successor of the PS2 digital pitch shifter and delay, which was the PS3 digital pitch shifter and delay. In the video about the Japanese era part 2, which this was part of, I named this as being my least favorite out of all of the Japanese era pedals, and a lot of people actually agreed with me. So it could only go up or down one octave. Its pitch shifting modes were fairly useless, and it was really only saved by the fact that it was a decent delay pedal. The PS3 just takes this to a whole new level. We can go up or down 2 octaves, but it's a fair bit more precise than the PS2. This also has delay modes as well, but the real magic of this pedal is that we have, from modes 4 through to 7, a combination of delay and pitch shift together. You just heard mode number 7 of the PS3 here. Now, no other Boss pitch shifter pedal before or after this one ever combined pitch shifting and delay together like this one does, which makes this one very highly sought after on the used market. It's very much loved in the shoegaze community and is used almost like an instrument in itself. That same year, Boss brought out another pedal which is very much related to the PS3, which was the HR2 Harmonist. This was significant because it was the very first small format intelligent harmonizer ever made by any brand. Although this pedal is the first of its kind, it still starts on the numeral 2. And this is something that goes back to 1982 when they stopped using the numeral 1 for new pedals. Now you can use this pedal to create some Brian May style 3-part harmonies, which is really cool. If we have a closer look at the control panel here, you'll see that the control on the end gives you the choice of key signature that you want to work in, and then the 2 controls in the middle are for what voice you want them to play, so that you can play different harmonies above or below your melodic note. Now, if you just want to use a 2-part harmony, you just set one of those voices to DT, which stands for detune mode, which is kind of like a chorus mode. And then the first 2 controls here are just for your level, for your dry and your affected signals. Digital technology at this time was being superseded at a very rapid rate, which meant that the HR2 here only remained in production for only 5 years. The last pedal of '94 was the OD2R Turbo Overdrive. This wasn't a new pedal, it was a revised version of the old OD2, which came out in 1985. Now the old OD2 here had a mode selector for 2 different types of drive. One was a sort of mild overdrive and the other one was a much more higher gain and more compressed overdrive. But unlike the Turbo Distortion that came out 2 years later, it does not have a remote jack so that you can toggle between these two with a foot switch. You had to do it manually. So this is fixed with the OD2R. It has a remote jack. You can plug in a remote foot switch to toggle between your 2 different modes. But the other major problem with the OD2, the original, was the fact that the higher gain mode was much softer than the low gain mode, and you had to attenuate the volume accordingly, where they fixed that on the OD2R. In 1995, Boss would release 2 of their most significant pedals, not just of the decade, but of their entire history. One of them was the BD2 Blues Driver. And just from a layout perspective, this harks back to the days of the Japanese era Part 1 and the simplistic designs of pedals like the SD1. In fact, this was the first Boss overdrive pedal to come out since the SD1 to use a 3-knob layout. Inside, however, the circuitry of this pedal is much more complicated than that of the OD1 or SD1, which had come out many years before. This was the first Boss overdrive to be designed to be touch responsive. Unlike their earlier overdrives and distortions, which were op-amp based, this circuit uses discrete JFET transistors that cascade into one another. A bit more like a fuzz, but a lot more refined than a fuzz pedal. As a result, this pedal can go from fairly light overdrive all the way up to distortion, and I would have to say is probably their most versatile overdrive pedal that they've ever brought out. The Boss BD2 was enormously popular, not just amongst Boss fans, but also pro players and other pedal builders who saw the potential of this type of circuit and started to build their own versions of the BD2. I think that a lot of people really liked its simplified layout, and it sort of harked back to the days of the Japanese era Part 1 when their pedals were a lot easier to operate and to get a good sound out of. And Boss would use this as inspiration in the next few years to come. Also that year, Boss would release the successor to the famed DD3 digital delay, which was the DD5 digital delay. Now this introduced a new feature that would transform the pedal industry. It was called tap tempo. Tap tempo is a feature that we expect with our delay pedals these days, no matter which brand is making it. It's also a feature that's been utilized on a lot of different modulation effects like tremolo, flanger, phaser, even univibe. But with this pedal, it was kind of like a new novelty idea. So like the DD3, it has a few different modes, and those modes are just different delay ranges. And then you actually have to put it into tempo mode and then attach an external foot switch like this to tap in the tempo. Like the DD3, it also has hold mode, but it also has another mode called reverse, where it plays the repeats in reverse. But you can't quite do the reverse tape thing like Hendrix, where you kill the dry signal and you just have the repeats going in reverse. Even with the effect level all the way up, it still has the dry signal in there. As revolutionary as it was, the DD5 never outsold the DD3. This would go out of production in the mid-2000s when they introduced the DD6, but the DD3 is still being sold almost 40 years later. In 1996, Boss would bring out two very short-lived drive pedals, which are amongst their rarest in their entire catalogue, the XT2 Distortion and the PW2 Power Driver. I've actually made a video about these two pedals last year where I discuss how they fit or didn't fit into the musical landscape at the time. By the mid-90s, the grunge era was on its way out, and I think that these two pedals came out too late to latch on to the heavy alternative rock movement that was really popular at the start of the decade. I actually mentioned in that video that Boss probably should have just remarketed the DS1 and DS2. These pedals were used by a lot of the bands that people were trying to emulate. Instead, they came up with these two pedals. Both of these pedals feature some very interestingly named controls. The XT2 here has a control called Punch, which is like a really honky frequency, and then it has a contour control, which sort of determines the shape or the focus of the mid-range. The power driver here apparently is the closest they've ever come to making a big muff circuit. I'm not sure I believe that because the FZ2 on mode 2 sounds very much like a big muff to me. However, this has two EQ controls, Fat, which is low end, and Muscle, which is mid-range, and funnily enough, it doesn't have a high control. But the power driver here, I think, does those sort of really dirty 90s tones quite well, whereas I think the XT2 here is a little harder to dial in. The XT2 only remained in Boss's catalogue till 1998, and the PW2 was only made for about 9 months and was taken out of their catalogue the following year, making it quite possibly the rarest pedal of this entire decade. Possibly due to the success of the BD2, which came out 2 years earlier, in 1997 Boss would release a trio of pedals with a simplified layout. One of them was the OD3 Overdrive. Now, don't let the simplistic layout of this pedal fool you. This is a very, very complex circuit, as explained by Brian Wampler in one of his brilliant videos. The OD3 is an evolution of the OD1 and SD1, but its circuit is much more intricate. There's a lot more filtering going on. Now, I did a video about the whole OD family, and after playing them all back to back, I realized how much I liked this particular pedal, and I think it does a really good job of vintage overdrive sounds. Over the next couple of years, the OD3 would outlast both the OD2R and the SD2, which were much more complicated pedals, and is such a popular pedal in their catalogue that it's still manufactured today, nearly 30 years later. Boss released their first tremolo pedal in 1990, which was the PN2 Tremolo Panner. This was the final year of the previous design period, which was the Japanese era Part 2. Now, the Tremolo Panner here was not particularly popular at the time and didn't sell particularly well, so it was taken off the market after only a few years. In 1997, Boss would have another go at tremolo, and they released the TR2 Tremolo pedal. Basically, the TR2 is a stripped-down version of the Tremolo Panner. It does away with the stereo mode, which means it can't do panning, and it does away with the toggle switch for the two different modes, which are triangle and square wave. Instead, it adds this knob here, which all the way to one side, it's the triangle waveform, all the way to the other side, it's the square waveform, and then you've got any combination of the two in between. The TR2 has been incredibly popular and is used by a lot of pros and is still in production today. The last of these three pedals was the FZ3 Fuzz. This is basically a stripped down version of the FZ2 Hyper Fuzz. The Hyper Fuzz has three different modes. It's got mode 1, which is a kind of fuzz face style fuzz, mode 2, which is a kind of big muff style fuzz, and mode 3, which was a gain boost mode. To my ear, I think that the FZ3 sounds like mode 1 of the Hyper Fuzz. The FZ3 was the first Boss pedal to have this hammered metal look, which I think looks really cool. It's described in the Boss book as being a labour of love for their engineers. However, it remained on sale only for 2 years before it went out of production. That means that both of their fuzz pedals that they brought out in the 90s were not made for very long, and that means that they are both very rare and very expensive. Boss is not usually a brand that comes to mind when you think about fuzz pedals, yet their track record with fuzz pedals is very, very good. Both of these pedals are highly sought after and are excellent, but they've also done a couple of Wazacraft fuzzes, both the Tonebender one and the FZ1, and they are both highly acclaimed as well. The final pedal they brought out in 1997 was something completely different, and I think showcases their tendency to push the boundaries and be creative, and that was the AC2 Acoustic Simulator. So basically the idea behind this pedal is that you plug your electric guitar into it and that you can simulate the sound of an acoustic guitar with it. The controls on this pedal are fairly unique as well. So we have body and top. Body is kind of a resonance control, while top gives you that sort of top end acoustic spank sort of sound. Then we have 4 different modes. So we have standard, jumbo, enhance, and we have piezo bridge. And then on the end, we have a level control. But I think possibly the smartest idea that this pedal introduced was having a dry out. So I refer to this one and its successor, the AC3, as the acoustic-ish simulator. It doesn't quite sound like an acoustic guitar, but when blended with the sound of your electric guitar, it kind of makes it sound like there's an acoustic guitar somewhere in the mix. So by using the second output here, you can put this in your pedal board for your electric guitar and run it through the electric guitar out, which basically takes this out of play, but then you can run the output of this into a mixing desk or another amplifier for that acoustic sound. And it just blended together with your electric sound kind of makes it sound like there is an acoustic guitar somewhere in the mix. In 1998, Boss bring out a single pedal, which was the TU2 Chromatic Tuner. This was their Stompbox version of their old TU12 Chromatic Tuner, which had been out since the early 80s. This gives you a few different tuning modes, allowing you to tune to standard, a flat tuning, or even a double flat tuning. You can set it to bass guitar mode, or you can do what I do and just set it to chromatic mode. In 1999, Boss released a single pedal to replace 2 of the pedals that we've already looked at. So the PS3 digital pitch shifter and delay and the HR2 Harmonists were both replaced by the PS5 Super Shifter. The PS5 strips away all of the unnecessary modes, particularly of the PS3. It takes away all of the delay modes, including those spectacular delay and pitch shift modes. And it just leaves you with a pitch shifter and a harmonist. But it doesn't have quite the same capabilities as the HR2. It's only capable of doing 2-part harmonies instead of 3-part harmonies. It does have a couple of modes that can be controlled by using the foot switch here. So it has flutter mode, which is kind of unique. And then it has T-arm, which basically makes this into a Digitech whammy style pedal that can be controlled by using the foot switch. Although this pedal is not as unique as the PS3, I think they did succeed in making it a lot more usable. From 2000 onwards, Boss would start a new design era, which from the outside is a lot harder to recognize because the changes were mainly internal. Boss would start to replace a lot of their long-running analog circuits with digital circuits. In fact, between 2000 and 2013, they would only release a single analog pedal that whole time. I call this next era the digital era. So what was your favorite Boss pedal from the 90s? Do you still have it? Do you still use it? Did you sell it and regret it? Let me know in the comments below. I'd be really interested to hear. If you like this kind of video, I've got plenty of other videos just like this in a playlist, which I will attach to this video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. You can support this channel by going to the Middle Age Gear Junkie store and buying some merchandise. And you can also support me through Patreon. Other than that, my name is Jason. Have a wonderful day. See you later.